Chapter 49. Tomoka's words were interrupted by Siddle. She looked at the blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl pulling her arm in surprise. Her words were very sincere. "Mom. You finally remembered. I'm not Ikuta, I'm your daughter." The bride's bloodshot eyes showed shock. She looked at Siddle in confusion. The bloodshot eyes gradually disappeared. "You are my daughter?" "That's right." Siddle grabbed her cold hand. "I'm your daughter, Siddle. Mom has been married for a long time. Dad is busy with work every day, has no time to be with her, so Mom gradually fell into a state of extreme depression, even suffered from severe gender identity disorder, so Mom considered you as Dad when she first got married. Finally Mom's gender identity disorder has been cured. Mom can recognize you now." It seemed that Tomoka was convinced. She stood there listening in a daze, then looked at the doll in her hand. Her eyes became gentle. "So, that's it, you've worked hard, Siddle." "It's okay. Who told you to be my beloved mom?" Siddle said, seeing that Tomoka seemed to trust her. She intended to hide behind the woman to report the tall guy behind her who bullied her daughter, but suddenly saw Tomoka frown. But, if I'm your daughter, then where's Ikuta?" "Siddle." "Great, Tomoka still misses her husband who died before completing the wedding. Looks like this is true love." Siddle paused, looking at Tomoka's peaceful face that started to get agitated after mentioning Ikuta. She knew that if Ikuta didn't appear, Tomoka probably wouldn't be able to calm down. The problem was, where could she get another Ikuta now? Wait. Siddle suddenly remembered a candidate. She turned her head, pointed at Slender Man not far away, swallowed the accusations she was about to say, and softly replied, "Mom, that's your husband, Ikuta." For some reason, Slender Man didn't chase him over, but instead stood under a tree. Siddle pointed at Slender Man. Tomoka also looked in the direction of her hand. She looked blankly at the ghost figure with countless tentacles waving behind her, hesitating uncertainly. "Why is Ikuta so tall?" "Siddle, of course it's because of Mom. The food Mom cooks every day is very nutritious. After many years of marriage, of course Dad will grow taller." "Tomoka, but why does Ikuta have so many arms?" Siddle knew she was talking about the tentacles, because Dad's work is too busy, so in order to complete the work, he evolved into those 8 arms. Siddle glanced at Slender Man's blank face, still thinking about how to explain to Tomoka about Ikuta's absence, when she heard the bride's soft sobbing voice. "Ikuta, so you're Ikuta." Tomoka didn't care about the bouquet of flowers scattered on the ground. Holding the little Siddle doll in her hand, her eyes red, she quickly walked forward. Siddle tactfully let go of her hand, watching the strange bride running towards Slender Man. Well, it seemed that this bride's gender identity disorder had been cured, but her face blindness was still there. Siddle quietly retreated, staring at the scene in front of her without blinking. A few seconds later, the space before her eyes was distorted again. Slender Man woke up on the soft bed. Because its body was too long, its lower body was lying flat on the floor. The beautiful bride in a white wedding dress stood by the bed, holding a doll tightly in her hand. The doll had blonde hair and blue eyes drawn with poor quality crayons, extremely similar to the little girl who had chased it before. The bride smiled sweetly, her cold, jet-black eyes still slightly red. She held the doll tightly in her hand, speaking gently. "Good, Ikuta, I finally found you. It turns out you're here. Let's go. Let's continue the wedding ceremony." Slender Man didn't say anything. Slender Man had nothing more to say. Mainly because it didn't have a mouth either. Seeing the person on the bed motionless, the beautiful bride's sweet smile suddenly turned gloomy. Her face was ugly as if she had just caught her husband cheating. Her fingers were deeply embedded in the doll. Her mouth made grinding noises. She held the doll up in front of Slender Man. Her tone was reluctantly gentle. "Look, this is our daughter, Siddle. What a lovely and obedient child she is. We are husband and wife, so we should raise her together. Have you forgotten all this?" Slender Man. Its long slender arms pushed against the floor to sit up. At the place where the tentacle was severed behind, the sticky liquid was still dripping down. "Come on, Ikuta, let's go to the church." The bride saw this, smiled with satisfaction, slowly hugged the doll tightly to her chest, and stared at Slender Man without blinking. Ikuta, you don't even think about escape. We must be together forever. The beautiful bride gently uttered a sentence that sounded like a curse. After the scene before her eyes changed again, when Siddle opened her eyes, what she saw was no longer the hotel ceiling, but she appeared in a large hall. In the hall were a series of dining tables covered with white cloth. Siddle took 2 steps back, wanting to turn around and leave, but she suddenly heard a sound coming from the dark corner of the hall. A gloomy voice filled with resentment rang out. How dare you let my mother marry someone who isn't her? Siddle. She saw the little girl in a white dress lying on the table in the corner slowly stand up, raise her head and look at her resentfully. That face looked a bit familiar. Oh, this was the little girl who had strangled Ikuta to death. The area around her eyes was completely black. Her body was small and thin. She gently stood up, and then she swayed and appeared in front of Siddle. You dare to let my mother marry that thing? It roared angrily, its face that already had 2 black holes scrunched up, looking even more terrifying. Siddle, she thought of Tomoka's pale face, empty eyes, and strangely stiff smile. Little friend, you wouldn't think that your mother was that person, would you? She wasn't human, and she could teleport, so it wouldn't make sense for Siddle to run. She thought for a moment, trying to talk to it, actually. But her words were interrupted by the little girl's scream. It looked at Siddle coldly and suddenly rushed towards her. Just before she passed out, Siddle suddenly felt her left eye starting to heat up. She unconsciously covered her left eye. The next moment, her body hit the cold ground. The wedding music from the church sounded intermittently like a cassette tape. In front of the gloomy lawn, a couple was holding a wedding ceremony. The white-dressed female demon flew to the window, saw the long-legged man in a black suit standing beside his petite mother, the tentacles behind him obediently closed behind his back. Under the smooth bald head was an empty face that seemed a little shy. The mother was also holding a doll in her hand, which was what her mother called her daughter. Originally, her mother only had her. The white-dressed female ghost did not move forward to disturb that terrifying, strange wedding. She angrily turned back to the little girl lying on the ground, flying around her a few times, her mouth continuously spewing crazy words. If you can't do it, then die. On the other side, in the dark forest filled with tombstones, a mobile phone with a faint light was lying on the ground, ringing continuously, like an alarm clock that someone had set. Ding ding ding. Ding, 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 there was no one beside the phone. Asahi, guess what gift Dad brought you? Asahi, the weather is nice today, let's go out. Do you want to hear a story before going to bed? How is it, did you pay attention to the teacher's lecture? Asahi is a good kid. Dad likes Asahi the most. Asahi. Why? I clearly said I love you and Mom the most, clearly agreed. Unforgivable, unforgivable. A large patch of bright red splashed onto the tatami mats and the screen. The room was covered in blood. The man holding the weapon turned around, his face covered in blood so his face and expression could not be seen clearly. All images and sounds suddenly stopped. Siddle woke up. Asahi, a woman's voice rang out beside her ear, gently calling her. It's time to take your medicine. Siddle opened her eyes, staring blankly at the Japanese-style beams above her head, her dry throat reminding her that right now, this body's health was not very good. Asahi? The woman called out to her sadly, worriedly pressing her smooth palm against Siddle's forehead. Siddle turned her head, looking at the woman beside the bed. Tomoka. To be exact, this was Ikuta Tomoka. Tomoka stroked her daughter's soft hair, using a towel to affectionately wipe the sweat from her forehead. Here, she helped Siddle sit up. After you drink the medicine, you will be well soon. She handed over a bowl of brown medicine. Siddle took it and slowly drank it. Mom, she turned her head to stare at the gentle and beautiful woman, whose eyes were exactly like that strange bride, but only her face, I want to go out for a walk. Okay, Tomoka replied gently, but don't go out, your illness hasn't completely healed yet, you can't catch a cold. Siddle nodded, crawled out of bed barefoot. Tomoka quickly took a pair of shoes and bent down to put them on for her. Siddle lowered her head to look at this gentle mother and suddenly remembered the scene of the whole room filled with blood earlier. She put on her shoes, slowly walked into the bathroom. As expected, in the mirror was the face of an Asian girl. Siddle touched her face, then rubbed her arms. Everything was so real. She stared at herself in the mirror, only able to sigh. Siddle knew that she had now turned into a 9-year-old girl, Ikuta Asahi. Remembering the appearance of the girl who had become a demon, it was not difficult for Siddle to know the age of the girl when she died. Soon, Ikuta Tomoka would be killed. And Ikuta Asahi would also die soon after. Siddle turned on the faucet, scooped water and splashed it on the girl's red-hot cheeks to cool down her body. She raised her head and coldly looked at the image in the mirror. Who was that man holding a weapon? Was Tomoka killed by him? And how did Asahi die? Most importantly, how much time had passed since that cruel murder?